For as long as humans have lived on Earth, we've been compelled to reckon with the forces of nature. From the dimly remembered struggle to survive amidst the immense and incomprehensible power of the elements, to the conquests of today's high-energy physics, our understanding of the ways of Mother Nature has always been the key to everything else. And since the beginning, an endless parade of shaman, priests, prophets, medicine men, inventors, scientists, magicians, geniuses, if you will, have dazzled us with their real or pretended penetration of nature's mysteries and have struggled to point the way for the rest of us. The trouble is, they've not always pointed in the same direction. While some have deserved our support, others have not. When we have chosen poorly, we've paid a heavy price in tyranny, injustice, and bloodshed. When we've chosen well whom to follow and which ideas to implement, nature herself has rewarded us with freedom, peace, and prosperity. They can put a man on the moon. Be nice if they could make a car that'd run without gas. Hi, I'm Doug Kenyon, editor and publisher of Atlantis Rising magazine. Preceding every great advance and many of the setbacks in our history, the geniuses, technologically speaking, of both light and darkness have battled for the hearts and minds of the rest of us. But despite the stubborn resistance of those committed to the primitive notions of earlier ages, the outrageous impossibilities of one generation continue to become the revolutionary breakthroughs of the next and the basic necessities of the future. Still, in the 20th century, while the Henry Fords, the Marconis, the Thomas Edisons have succeeded in capturing most of the attention, others, with technological prowess bordering on the miraculous, strangely have gone unnoticed. Men with names like Tesla, Moray, Riech, Russell, and Schauberger, laboring in almost complete obscurity and achieving almost incomprehensible miracles, it is said. Free energy, anti-gravity, transmutation of the elements, physical rejuvenation, and more, were yet largely rejected, ridiculed, or despised by the scientific establishment of their day. But now, a few decades later, a new breed of inventors, scientists, and researchers is making rapid, if yet unpublicized, strides toward unraveling the astonishing secrets of those unsung giants who preceded them. Today, many of these new technological magicians find themselves on the threshold of breakthroughs still believed by many to be the stuff of hallucination. In the next hour, we'll learn how prolonged youth, infinite energy, escape from gravity, maybe even cars without gas, and much, much more may be nearing tangible reality. But we'll also learn that some seem to fear such developments and will apparently do whatever they can to prevent them from coming to pass. Join us now as Atlantis Rising presents Clash of the Geniuses, Inventing the Impossible. When FBI agents entered the shabby room in Manhattan's New Yorker hotel in January 1943, they were looking for technical data, plans, details perhaps of a secret weapon. It was wartime, and no chances could be taken that an enemy might lay hands on the secrets of the frail 86-year-old man who had just died there. The agents quickly removed the contents of a small safe and left. What exactly was taken remains a mystery to this day, but many still believe it could have included the secrets of infinite power, the wireless transmission of energy, and maybe even weapons of awesome destructive power. After all, the dead man was none other than Yugoslavian-born scientist Nikola Tesla, the inventor of alternating current and holder of hundreds of major patents in electrical energy, a man who had turned down a nomination for the 1912 Nobel Prize in Physics. Why did such a man die penniless and alone? And why, over 50 years later, should we care?
Today, some of the greatest scientists who ever lived are hardly even known to most people. Nikola Tesla, who was probably the greatest scientist ever, is pathetically unknown to even many electrical engineers and people of science backgrounds.
He was such a gifted inventor and was really one of the initial people that began to look at the whole concept of free energy outside the normal realm of physics. He envisioned the free energy based on universal principles.
The guys like Tesla, who are really doing great things. In fact, things that we rely on even today, I mean, AC current, the whole transmission system that runs most homes and businesses was Tesla, yet many people don't know his name. He was also a guy that was advancing ideas for new energy weapons back at the turn of the century.
Bolts of lightning, or what we refer to as lightning, but it was an energy beam, and he was throwing that against Pikes Peaks, 26 miles away. And he was able to maintain it, turn it on, hold it, and then turn it off. Here we have a replica of Nikola Tesla's laboratory that used to exist in Colorado Springs.
Today, research into Nikola Tesla's many amazing discoveries continues near his former laboratory in Colorado Springs by members of the International Tesla Society, such as new energy inventor Jerry Levine.
The device inside was referred to as a magnifying transmitter. This device was designed to coax energy out of the Earth's core and actually send large bolts of lightning, but not lightning in the usual sense. It was more like a particle beam that he would throw out. There's a documentation of this in newspapers and stuff at the time where he did a demonstration with this magnifying transmitter and actually lit 10,000 watts worth of light bulbs 26 miles away. You're talking about a device that could be the size of your average swimming pool that people have at home, okay, about that big of an area, and yet that device would be capable of putting out enough energy to run probably 5 states. So when he told the world that he was going to produce power of an undreamt degree, I think it went over their head, because that's exactly what he was doing with this.
Tesla was not the only genius of the 20th century to experience the pangs of ridicule and rejection.
Henry Moray did indeed have the ability to tap the energy of space and produce usable amounts of electrical energy.
T. Henry Moray was never able to get the American scientific community to pick up on the great achievement he had made. And so when he passed away, by that moment, it had been lost in history.
Thomas Henry Moray, an electrical engineer from Salt Lake City, believed humans could pry energy directly from the cosmos and proved his point in public demonstrations. His radiant energy device, which drew power from space, ran for days at a time. Many respected authorities witnessed demonstrations of his tabletop device, which with no moving parts could light incandescent bulbs, heat a flat iron, and run a motor. Today in Moray's hometown, Hal Fox, the editor of New Energy News, also based in Salt Lake City, can still locate many of the forgotten sites where it is said the legendary inventor broke the bonds of the possible.
This is the area where Henry Moray's laboratory was. They tore down the laboratory, and I remember T. Henry Moray's house with 2 big power poles with a wire strung between them and lines going down into his basement window. And we were told at the time that he was running his house on power that he picked up just out of the air.
New energy pioneer and theoretician Tom Bearden believes many of today's most astonishing discoveries owe much to the work of heroes earlier in this century.
T. Henry Moray demonstrated dozens and dozens and dozens of times this beautiful developments that he had made. He was suppressed by actually an agent being planted in his lab, probably a double agent, apparently worked for both an American agency and also the Russians. He was shot at on the streets. He had to ride in a bulletproof car. He was shot in his lab, physically shot. The Russians tried to kidnap him once in New York City, almost like a dime store novel, every bit true.
For his achievement, Moray was threatened and harassed until his death in 1974. Walter Russell, a painter and scientific theoretician whose ideas about alchemy and the transmutation of metals are only beginning to be understood, predicted tritium, deuterium, neptunium, plutonium, and other elements in 1926. His ideas were ridiculed. In the same decade, Royal Raymond Rife invented a high magnification, high resolution light microscope which could see unstained living cells. He went on to develop electromagnetic methods for killing bacteria and promoting health. For his trouble, the authorities put him out of business and suppressed his inventions. Austrian Victor Schauberger made breakthrough discoveries with vortex turbulence in water and invented methods of energy generation which harmonized fully with the ecosystem. Forced to work for the Nazis in World War II, Schauberger was believed to be the principal source of rumored top-secret flying saucer technology in the Third Reich. After the war, Schauberger came to America and was swindled out of his inventions. He died a broken man. Another Austrian, later an American, Wilhelm Reich, claimed to have discovered a unifying force in nature, which he called orgone. In 1948, the noted British educator A.S. Neal reported watching a small motor in Reich's shop running on orgone energy alone. Nevertheless, no one took up his work, and the FDA attacked him for his claims for orgone energy and for physical therapy. He died in federal prison, his books and papers burned.
Someone once said, you can tell a pioneer by the arrows in their backside. It's been very hard on people who come up with novel ideas that aren't fully understood. It's been so difficult for them to stand up to the ridicule, the scorn, the laughter, the lack of camaraderie, the lack of funding, the inability to publish. There's just an extraordinary number of battles that pioneers in new energy, in new science, in new medicine face and have always faced.
Nevertheless, despite the unyielding opposition of entrenched interests in business, the academic world, and government, a new generation of courageous, albeit unorthodox pioneers carries on, and now seems poised on the brink of hitherto undreamed of possibilities in at least 3 areas: transmutation and rejuvenation, anti-gravity, and free energy. The dream of freedom from the bonds of gravity has apparently been with us since the beginning, from Ezekiel's chariot to flying carpets. The ancient scriptures and legends brim with accounts of flight in many forms. Some of the most vivid come from ancient India.
As far as I know, we have not actually recovered an ancient flying machine itself. We have uncovered the evidence of such machines. There are gold models which appear to be of flying machines which have been found in Colombia. A model of an airplane has also been found in a tomb in ancient Egypt. I think more importantly, we have the ancient documents, ancient books from ancient India and ancient China and other areas, which indicate that people did, in fact, fly in aerial devices, probably devices similar to the airplanes of today, similar to zeppelins or blimps and dirigibles, quite possibly even flying devices that were similar to flying saucers and hovercraft type devices.
Today, the dream of flight seems best embodied in the modern mechanical technologies which have descended from the Wright brothers. But could there be a more efficient form of flight, one that somehow cancels out the forces of gravity? There is, after all, evidence from the ancient world that very large and heavy objects were moved by means which remain a mystery today. Yet it's possible that at least one of our contemporaries may have learned the secret. In Homestead, Florida, during the 1930s and 40s, Edward Leach Scaldon, a reclusive immigrant working entirely by himself, placed over 1,100 tons of stone blocks to create a fantastic and mysterious structure called Coral Castle. Most of the blocks weighed in excess of 15 tons, some as much as 30 tons, yet the secret methods employed have never been discovered. Tool designer and engineer Christopher Dunn is astonished by this unrepeatable accomplishment.
Ed actually stated that he knew the secret of the Great Pyramid, and he also demonstrated that he had a technique or a knowledge that whereby he was able to lift monolithic, huge blocks of stone, 30 tons for one individual. The equipment that he has laying around in a conventional sense does not explain how he did this by himself.
Toward the end of World War II, reports of unusual German aircraft that flew without wings or rudder began to surface in Europe, and Allied intelligence moved in to find out more. The German rocket technology had devastated London, and there was to be no underestimating of their capabilities. Though the danger was shortly rendered moot by the end of the war, interest in capturing any such breakthrough anti-gravity technology remained high. Indeed, according to some researchers, such as Renato Vesco, the former head of the technical section of the Italian Air Force, and David Hatcher Childress, as reported in their book, Man-Made UFOs 1944 to 1994, the Allies recovered many such secrets. Most of the German anti-gravity technology, according to Vesco and Childress, was based on the work of Victor Schauberger. Another inventor who apparently made major breakthroughs in the field of anti-gravity was American T. Townsend Brown. A retired Navy officer, Brown developed technologies in electricity and gravity as early as 1945. In 1953, he demonstrated flying discs for Air Force and industry representatives in Cleveland, Ohio. Despite a completely successful demonstration, the government expressed no interest in Brown's work. Nevertheless, the test results were classified, and Brown's life, until his death in the 1960s, was made miserable by anonymous harassers. Attempts to follow up on his work continue today. Another controversial inventor on the anti-gravity frontier is English inventor John Searle.
And away. From then on, I was able to design the oscillator circuits to control the running, because you only got to stop one roller and the whole lot stopped.
Utilizing a unique combination of rotating magnets, Searle claims to be able to achieve a breakdown in gravity's hold. Searle claims to have built 40 discs based on his effect, many of which have simply taken off and disappeared, it is said.
The record time was that between Mortimer and the edge, the end landmark of Cornwall, it took 3 minutes to get there. Well, I would say we're looking at about 100 odd miles. And that was a model being withheld from the maximum speed. It wasn't touching anything. We were only just satisfying the media what it could do. And that was only a model.
Today, several groups in the US and the UK are attempting to duplicate his results. It is said the ancient pyramid builders of Egypt possessed a science of immortality, which they wrapped in mystery and enshrined in their monuments for future generations to rediscover, if they could. The quest for immortality has been with us ever since. Thousands of years later, Spanish explorer of the New World, Ponce de Leon, took seriously reports from the Indians of a fountain of youth and spent his life in a futile quest to find it. During the Middle Ages, isolated scholars and hermits challenged the prevailing dogmas of their time and searched for nature's secrets. Alchemists, they were called, and it was whispered that some had discovered the secrets of eternal youth and knew, moreover, how to change lead into gold. Today, the suggestion that such things are possible provokes snickers, but the very real accomplishment of the alchemists were no joke. Many modern scientific achievements, especially chemistry, are rooted in their discoveries. In the 14th century, Roger Bacon invented the telescope and gunpowder, and Albertus Magnus defined flame as ignited smoke. Later, Paracelsus was the first European to mention zinc and used the word alcohol to refer to the spirit of wine. The foundations of modern homeopathic medicine are his legacy, and while today's mainstream medicine, also known as allopathic medicine, focusing on the treatment of the symptoms of disease, dominates, the following is mushrooming for homeopathy and other forms of alternative healing which concentrate on the promotion of wellness. Today, the possibilities and healing, rejuvenating technologies of men like Royal Raymond Rife and Wilhelm Reich are being explored with new vigor. Physical therapist, scientist, and inventor Sky David has developed a technology of light and information which moves beyond Reich's work and is reported to produce health and wholeness at the cellular level.
Picture the constituents of the cell as like a school of fish. The ATP is the concert master that coordinates them. What I did with this medium here was to create an interference medium. And when you look at the actual pattern created by the device, I was able to create patterns which duplicate cellular energetics. So if I were to say put it on an injury, say on my hand here, within 40 minutes of time, I would have an effect of heightened mitochondrial activity throughout the whole physiology. I developed a device, and it has in it a spherical ruby, which is synthetic, and 6 tiny emeralds. The emeralds actually are natural emeralds. And in working with it, I found it not only breaks up gross blockages, but also even subtle blockages. The reason for 6 emeralds really has to do more with sacred geometry and biology. After all, sacred geometry is not something that somebody made up. It was an observation of inherent patterns in nature and in the universe.
When we measure humans in the most relaxed healing states, we find, in fact, that their energies are resonant with earth energies. For example, people meditating enter into predominance of alpha rhythm in the brain, 8 to 10 hertz or waves per second emitted from their brains. This is exactly the Schumann resonance of earth. And I don't think that's any coincidence. I think that when we put ourselves into relaxed healing states, we become one with the big mind, the Gaia, of which we are a part. And that is the most healing state for a human being to enter into, the resonant states with Earth.
One of today's best-known holistic physicians, Dr. Viktor Frankl, believes that when it comes to healing, nothing should be called impossible.
We've been taught for the last 40 years that the body is run by a computer in our head, somewhere in the body, and every function that we know about is a one-thought program in that computer. And we've learned how to test for those functional programs. And we found soft tissue, hard tissue, electronic stimulations to re-establish the flow of that program, to take out the glitch. We can now change blood pictures. We can do a slide for a sore throat, do a correction, do a slide seconds apart, and have massive infection and no infection within 10 seconds. The body works that way. From cadaver studies, they say, no, it can't work that way. It doesn't happen. We know from living bodies that the body is built to be well, and if you can direct it in the right direction, it happens now. Not tomorrow, not next month, now.
Today, the legacy of the alchemists is not limited to rejuvenating the physical body. Even transmutation, the legendary metamorphosis of base metals into more refined elements, usually taken to mean lead into gold, is becoming a reality. Mainstream science would agree, but point to such accomplishments of high-priced, high-energy physics as the cyclotron or even so-called hot fusion. But even independent, low-budget inventors are achieving comparable ends. Canada's John Hutchison, for example, has produced startling but fundamental changes in metals placed in complex electromagnetic fields in his laboratory. Probably nobody has come closer to the ancient ideal of transmutation, though, than Walter Russell. Today, inventor Toby Groats believes he has, in experiments in his private Colorado laboratory, come close to uncovering many of Russell's secrets.
He was able to utilize the facilities of the Westinghouse Lamp Laboratories in Bloomfield, New Jersey, to test his theories on transmutation. Using a quartz tube similar to this, he was able to take water vapor and, using specifically designed magnetic fields, cause that water vapor within the tube to be transmuted into either hydrogen, nitrogen, or oxygen.
There are some who believe the latter-day transmutation of the elements lies at the heart of what the media has termed cold fusion.
So we're quite confident that we are transmuting about 95% of the naturally radioactive thorium used in these low-energy nuclear reactors.
Hal Fox heads the Fusion Institute, where research continues into a process declared impossible by the priesthood of high-energy physics.
This is a new technology with tremendous potential, and our first objective in our laboratory work is to help to reduce the problems of cleanup of radioactive waste by developing systems that can reduce the radioactivity by transmutation of the radioactive elements, reduce the radioactivity on site without transporting those dangerous radioactivity across several states, and then trying to store them for 10,000 years in some mountain in Nevada or any other place.
We're looking to determine the actual cause of low-energy nuclear changes. This is referred to sometimes as transmutation or alchemy.
But whether the ancient alchemical dream of transmuting lead into gold becomes a reality or not, it is clear that in the crucible of modern science, a no less dramatic change in the way people think has already begun to appear.
Scientists have begun searching through old data and new data falling out of current research into such topics as cold fusion that indicate there may be molecular changes and atomic changes occurring which are not explainable by the normal or previously accepted theories and paradigms of physics.
Science has long known that when the energy at the core of the atom is released, the power is virtually infinite. In recent decades, the only artificial way of achieving that end has been fission, or the splitting of the nuclei in atoms, as in bombs or nuclear power plants. Unfortunately, fission produces more than energy. It produces deadly radiation byproducts. A more desirable way of unlocking the atom's energy would be fusion, as in the sun, which yields few harmful byproducts. The problem, this method apparently requires heat comparable to the sun. It's not an easy thing to achieve on Earth. For decades, the holy grail of today's high-energy physics establishment has been the achievement of hot fusion, like the sun. But on March 23, 1989, two scientists at the University of Utah announced that they had achieved cold fusion in a 1-quart mason jar filled with deuterium. A platinum wire and a 1-inch square sheet of palladium attached to a wire was then added to the jar. Instead of the usually expected electrolysis, the apparatus was producing excess heat, which could not be accounted for by any conventional theories. The Utah scientists believed the nuclei of the deuterium atoms were being forced close enough together to create another element, thereby releasing heat and energy. Inasmuch as the U.S. Department of Energy and the country's leading high-energy physicists had been spending billions to achieve hot fusion, the announcements from Dr. Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann caused a sensation, but not for long.
In the beginning, there was polite reaction to Pons and Fleischmann. There was skepticism. We don't really believe they can be doing this, but they weren't being attacked right away. There was a sort of a grace period of a few weeks to a month or two. But then the knives came out. They were actually already out on day one, but they were just being sharpened.
Dr. Eugene Malev served at Massachusetts Institute of Technology during the period of initial furor following the discoveries of so-called cold fusion. Today, he edits and publishes Infinite Energy magazine.
And what happened was more and more people all over the world began to do the experiment in laboratories everywhere, and people began to report positive results. Of course, there were also negative results reported. And at a certain point in the spring of 1989, the story became so large, it was the cover story of Time, Newsweek, and Businessweek in the United States. And therefore, the Department of Energy and the President of the United States felt, President Bush at that time, felt something had to be done. So they hired a panel, they formed a panel of experts, so-called experts, to review this. There were 22 scientists on that panel. And that panel came to a very rapid conclusion with only months that this was negative, no good results were coming out of it, it was nonsense, and the co-chairman of the panel, Dr. Huizenga, really wanted to get rid of it 100%. He wanted a 100% negative report. It was very negative, and effectively killed off interest by the official sector and certainly killed off funding. But cold fusion research never stopped. It's very big in Japan now, very big in Italy, very big in many laboratories in the United States where the work goes on and toward commercialization. And we now have reactors that are putting out on the order of 1,000 watts or more that are prototypes for bigger things yet to come.
Fortunately, due to Pons and Fleischmann, we do have a repeating experiment in the field of cold fusion. No matter what, cold fusion will never die as a field, regardless of which individuals fail to participate anymore. It will carry on because it repeats, and it puts it into the realm of science. Not too many people necessarily believe it all, but that's because they didn't do the experiments. But those that have researched it, very intelligent people researching it, finally discover that there's a real effect there, and that hooks their interest.
These people at MIT showed that it didn't work because they tried it and it didn't work. Well, actually, a negative experiment is never any proof. But what was really sad about it, as Dr. Mitchell Schwartz showed, they changed the data to make sure that it showed that it didn't work. And we published in Fusion Facts the paper by Dr. Schwartz about that. The same was true with work that had gone on in England in attacking cold fusion, and also at California Institute of Technology. They actually got some small amount of excess heat and then either ignored it or changed their data.
This phenomenon is far more established in the kinds of evidence that have already been produced for it than many other phenomena that physicists talk about today, that they accept and that the journalists accept. For example, when you have some obscure, some announcement from a major nuclear facility with 400 names of authors on one paper saying, we now have found a new quark. Okay, we've identified some subtle evidence for it, or we're nearly certain the evidence is there. The evidence for cold fusion is far, far, far better than that kind of evidence, okay? And furthermore, that kind of information, as wonderful as it is to know about the structure of subatomic particles, is nowhere near as important as our energy survival and the environmental welfare of the planet.
Humanity has always searched for energy, from the fire that warmed us in the caves to the animals that pulled our carts, from the steam that powered our ships to nuclear fusion today. Our search has always been illuminated by the dream of energy, plentiful and cheap, enough to make us healthy and prosperous. That, in fact, we believe to be the very purpose of nature. In today's energy-intensive world, we tap the power of nature in many ways. Most of our methods, such as the burning of fossil fuels, waste much of what is taken and replace it with gases, which heat the planet and poison our air. Other methods draw their power directly from natural currents, such as water, air, or sunlight, and leave the source relatively unchanged. However, replacing the fossil fuels and billions of wasteful, polluting internal combustion engines with hydrogen fuel cells, or perhaps something better, as in the technologies envisioned by researchers like Toby Gross or Hal Fox, could take something like a revolution. Nevertheless, the global need for clean, abundant, renewable energy right now is great and growing. The question is, where do we get it? The exciting answer from many of today's research pioneers is all around us. Not in the air or the water or the sunlight, but in the very fabric of space itself. The part that's there when everything else is not there. The so-called zero-point energy.
In this field today, the term zero-point energy is much in vogue. What has been found out over the last several decades, particularly in physics, is that the vacuum, the emptiness in front of you, when you remove the air from it and just look at the emptiness, is not really an emptiness at all. As a matter of fact, it's filled with enormous amounts of energy, but of a very peculiar nature.
When we talk about zero-point energy, we're recognizing a true energy source, very similar to recognizing that the sun exists and solar energy exists. It's an energy that's truly there in the fabric of space, and as an engineer, we're exploring, can it really be tapped as an energy source?
Dr. Moray B. King wrote Tapping the Zero-Point Energy, one of the first books to explain the existence of so-called space energy.
It is electromagnetic, electrical field energy that vibrates very rapidly. You could think of it as microscopic, very, very small lightning inherent to the fabric of space itself, going off all the time. It's constantly random jitter.
Is really in an open system which is driving everything, and everything else is exchanging energy violently with it all the time, and is trying to stay in equilibrium with it, but it's driving it all the time. So we found out that we lived in an incredible ocean of energy.
Look at the ripples moving across the surface of the water, and imagine that all of our present harnessing of the forces of nature is merely the tapping of those ripples. Unmindful as we move along that we are floating on the surface of a powerful river into whose motion we have not yet dipped our paddle wheels. That is the dream that motivates a host of new energy inventors.
The key of C is interesting, as are all keys, because the fundamental of each key is the oneness from which all the notes of that key are derived. So one without the other cannot exist. The positive side of a vibration can't exist without the negative side. They are one in that essence. So the oneness of it contains the essence of both. And that's the 0 point. That's what Schauberger started working on. That's what Tesla developed. That's what these guys around here talking about scalar technology, 0 point technology. Keely called it the full harmonic chord.
One of the earliest pioneers of free energy was 19th century inventor John Worrell Keely. Today, inventor Dale Pond is working to uncover Keely's secrets.
John was a unique individual. Very few people ever occur in history like this man. He was born either 1827 or 1837. His life is basically a big mystery. We know certain things about what he did as a youth. He was into music, he was a carpenter, he did painting, various different things. He stumbled on some kind of aspect of water physics, and I believe that was water hammer, which was just becoming to be known in the 1880s. He developed a motor which became the famous Keely motor in Philadelphia, which operated on the basis of water hammer and vibration. It's this thing about water hammer that's so unique and interesting, has led to phenomenal insights into the process called implosion, which is cavitation. And in an effort to release that, all of a sudden we're talking about subquantum physics, Dirac, meson fields, and all kinds of stuff. And here was a man dealing in subatomic quantum physics before there was an atomic physics. Over a period of years, as I learned about the water hammer thing, and I learned about the physics of cavitation and the water hammers and the vibration, I began to realize that if we were going to find and reinterpret and redevelop what Keely did, we would have to work with the Dynasphere, because it was the machine through which we could learn the most, and it was his takeoff point, you might say, from which he developed many other technologies and machines and inventions and devices.
A century after Keely's saga, his legacy and that of other new energy pioneers lives on in the work of many unorthodox and still unsung inventors. A few of the most promising, though, could be nearing the kind of mainstream acceptance which most of their predecessors only dreamed of. The late Floyd Sparky Sweet is credited with creating a breakthrough magnetic solid-state motor. A magnetic specialist with a distinguished industrial career, Sweet was a man whose technical claims could not be easily dismissed. Many credible witnesses saw his device work, and Toby Groats was able to photograph these demonstrations.
This is Floyd Sweet's vacuum triode amplifier, powering two 100-watt incandescent lamps and a small DC motor. The term vacuum triode amplifier, or VTA, is a word that was coined by Tom Bearden in order to explain the phenomenon of how energy from the 0 point energy state was coupled into Floyd Sweet's over unity free energy device. The hardware configured in this photograph was set up and run, producing in excess of over 2 million to 1 power gain. It's definitely one of the outstanding examples of how 0 point energy over unity devices can be made to actually function and work.
Canadian inventor John Hutchison has built a device which employs crystalline materials and electrical resonance to produce sustained electrical currents without batteries or any other input. He calls it a space energy converter.
This one here is basically a portable unit I'll be taking to Japan, and it puts out approximately 6 volts, 2 to 6 volts. And the main tuning crystal section is up here. I'm adjusting this slowly. We get an overload. OL is overload. Another overload, 6.51 volts, 6.2. I have now adjusted this so it has some working energy.
I've traveled all over the world investigating free energy systems, inventors of free energy systems. I've seen many, many attempts to put free energy systems together. In my opinion, the space-powered generator being designed and built in India by Paramahamsa Tiwari is one of the premier systems of today.
In India, Paramahamsa Tiwari, a nuclear physicist, has built a magnetic motor, which he calls the space power generator because it taps into the energy that surrounds us. Toby Groats made numerous measurements of Tiwari's apparatus and was able to confirm many of the inventor's claims and to take these pictures shown here publicly for the first time.
Tiwari's space-powered generator is being funded by one of the largest corporations in Asia because they understand the potential and the risks of bringing new power and new power systems into the public marketplace.
I couldn't understand why nobody had written a book for the general public about what was going on around the world. I mean, there were inventors in every country that you could think of, and now they're talking on the internet, and there's a growing excitement.
Researcher and journalist Jean Manning is author of The Coming Energy Revolution.
In the early 80s, I met an inventor who said that he had a magnet motor generator and that it was possible to tap into some energy in space around us by use of really powerful magnets. Well, I was fascinated by this unusual topic and found that there wasn't any course that I could take. There wasn't a university course in free energy. So I started going to conferences around the world. There was in Switzerland in '89 the Swiss Association for Free Energy, and in Germany the German Association for Gravity Field Energy. And I met many inventors and researchers and scientists who were just dedicated to bringing us a clean energy technology.
Author, editor, and publisher Nick Begich of Earth Pulse Press has done extensive research into the new energy science.
I think countries that have a need, a greater need than ours, for alternative energies because it's totally bleeding their economy, that's where we're going to see the emphasis and breakthroughs, because they really need it. Japan is a prime example, now funding to a good extent cold fusion is a very good example of that. They need it worse than we do. And yet, if you eliminated the import of oil and gas in the United States, our deficit would be virtually gone. 90% of our national trade deficit could be eliminated by just the removal of the import of oil, which strengthens our dollar, which is a lot of good things for our economy. So there's trade-offs, but in the interest of humanity, energy must be cheap, it must be available, and it must be clean.
Nikola Tesla demonstrated that he could transmit energy without wires. T. Henry Moray and Wilhelm Reich drew power from the universal. Royal Raymond Wright fought disease with electricity. T. Townsend Brown made discs fly without propellers or rockets. Today, many independent inventors are duplicating the results of these and other unappreciated geniuses, but energy is still expensive. Flight without vast quantities of fuel is still not a reality, and people still die from diseases which could be treated with alternative methods. The question is why? That is a question which many in the scientific and business communities and the media may yet be compelled to answer. Let us hope their answers are more compelling than those of repressive establishments throughout history, who, in order to preserve their own influence, power, and business advantage, withheld life-saving information from the very people for whose welfare they were responsible.
It's going to be more like an evolution rather than a real revolution. As this evolution continues over, let's say, a 20-year period, you're going to find that every time you burn less fuel, you reduce the pollution of the atmosphere, you reduce the pollution in the cities, one more step down. So gradually we're going to see the pollution coming down. We won't need the big nuclear power plants. We won't need to create all these nuclear byproducts. So we're going to see that pollution going down. And we're going to see eventually the restoration of this beautiful Earth planet of ours, so vividly seen in the NASA photos from space. We are going to see the Earth planet returned to our own true Mother Earth.
There will be an era, I would say, of optimism. And that's, in fact, one of the worst things that was stolen by the enemies of cold fusion, was optimism and promise of very hopeful future for our children, rather than a promise of continued environmental disasters and worry over energy availability and so forth and global warming. This will change. Suddenly, when the implications are fully known and they are talked about in the press, I hope we will have a revolution in thought on this planet.
But with these alternatives, what's presented is potentials for universal health care that's cost efficient, potentials for universal agricultural applications that can grow food at much greater rates. Experiments already show you can produce 30% greater yields in 30% less time using some of these subtle energy technologies. And then the energy consumption overall in terms of what you can build and what you can do with industry if it were balanced. When you take those three factors, those address food, clothing, and shelter, the basis of what all human beings need. And then you have the sense of security, which is built upon the idea that there's enough for people. And then you have the sense of belongingness, but the greatest thing you have is self-actualization. If people begin to actualize their potentials because those basic needs are met, incredible things will happen. Revolutions in every area of human activity can take place. When you're freed from the burden of being enslaved to just providing for those basic things, that's where the change will happen, and that's where everything will change.
We're told that we live in a world where there's scarcity of energy resources, where some countries have fossil fuel deposits and other countries are the have-nots. But the truth is that the energy of space is distributed equally all around the planet. There isn't any certain country that has deposits of zero-point energy that are richer than another country. It's equality now. It's a new game. I know what it means. It means that my sons don't have to go off and fight any oil wars.
For energy systems will create a world that basically makes a small pie larger. Right now, if you look at the distribution of resources and the consumption of energy, 1/3 of us on this planet consume 2/3 of all the power. And that leaves a significant number of people on this planet, 2-3 billion people, without power. They go home at night to a mud floor and there's no light to turn on, there's no pump to pump water, and they're living in abject poverty. Free energy will become the great equalizer and will reduce the stress among people and nations as no other technological advancement ever has in any age previous to this time.